Now that we have learned about cellular energy, we're going to start looking into more details of how that energy is created and stored. And we're going to take a look at photosynthesis. Plants are what we call autotrophs, where they have to make their own food. They're not like you and I, where we consume our own food. Plants actually have to manufacture their own food. And they do this through the process of photosynthesis so that they can create food, which will then generate cellular energy, generate ATP. If you are following along in your book, we are in section 8.2 on page 230. Photosynthesis is where plants use energy of sunlight. They then convert water and carbon dioxide into oxygen and high energy carbohydrates like sugars and starches. So photosynthesis, conversion of water and carbon dioxide and sunlight into carbohydrates. Now, how the concept of photosynthesis was discovered was through a couple different scientists and their experiments. Van Helmont's experiment, he took a plant and planted it in the soil like you do, and he watered it and grew the plant for 5 years. And afterwards he had a much bigger plant and the same amount of soil. So the key was, how did the plant get bigger if the soil was still the same? Where did that added mass for the plant come from? And so it had to come from the water, because he knew that plants continually got water, so he somehow inferred that the water had to increase the mass of the plant. So he got the first part of the equation correct. He got the H2O part of the equation correct. But what he didn't have were the other key components of the equation, like carbon dioxide. So then a scientist named Priestley was doing some experiments in which he had a candle that he placed in the jar, inside a jar, in a closed jar. And the candle would go out. And he was able to conclude that the candle went out because it used up all of the oxygen, and oxygen was necessary for fire. So then he had a plant that he placed in the jar with the candle, and what he observed was that after a few days of the plant being in the jar with the candle could be relit. And so he drew the conclusion that the plant was releasing oxygen. And after a few days, enough oxygen would be built back up in the jar that you could relight the candle and it would burn. So he concluded that plants actually give off oxygen. And then you have Ingenhousz, and Ingenhousz took Priestley's experiment a little bit further and found that plants that were placed in, they took aquatic plants like you would put in an aquarium, and in the dark the plants would not produce any bubbles. But when the plants were in the light, they would produce bubbles, and that's because they were making oxygen. And he was able to conclude that plants must be exposed to light in order to produce that oxygen, so that sunlight had to be a key component for plants to grow, to produce that mass. So this is just kind of a little bit of a history of how this whole entire concept of photosynthesis and the formula for photosynthesis slowly got put together by all of these gentlemen's different experiments. So somehow it was concluded that plants had to be able to capture light. And that is exactly what plants do inside of the chloroplast. So the chloroplast is a specialized organism in a plant that contains chlorophyll. And chlorophyll is what is absorbing the sunlight. Okay. Now, we perceive sunlight as being white. When we look outside, we observe it as a white light. but actually you can break that down into all the colors of the rainbow, Roy G. Biv. And there are different types of chlorophyll inside a chloroplast, and these different types of chlorophyll absorb different colors of light. And light is a form of energy, and so anything that absorbs light will also absorb the energy from that light. You can see here two of the most common types of chlorophyll, chlorophyll A and chlorophyll B, and you can also see what colors of light they absorb. And you will notice that they absorb a lot of blue and violet light and a lot of red light, but very little green light. And this is why plants appear green, because the chlorophyll is absorbing all of the blue and the violet and the red light, and it's not absorbing any green light. So the plant is reflecting that green light, which is why all plants appear green. So in the cell of a plant are chloroplast, and inside the chloroplast are what are called thylakoids. And these thylakoids are these things that are arranged in sort of like stacks of pancakes, and they're called grana. And inside the grana are chlorophyll, which is a light absorbing pigment, and light is energy, so they're an energy absorbing pigment. And they have a fluid around them called the stroma, which is where the Calvin cycle takes place. And the Calvin cycle is very important, and we'll be talking about that later on. So the chloroplast, is where the energy is absorbed inside a plant. And it's got the thylakoids, which contain the chlorophyll, and the chlorophyll is the pigment that's absorbing the sunlight, and there's a couple different types of chlorophyll. And this is also why plants change color in the fall. This is why leaves change color. Okay. When in the fall, when the temperature starts to drop and we get less and less hours of sunlight every day, a plant is absorbing less and less chlorophyll every single day. And when it's absorbing less chlorophyll, the other colors, like the reds and the oranges, start getting reflected by the leaves because they're no longer absorbing that color chlorophyll. So the temperature drops, the plant begins to receive less and less sunlight each and every day as less chlorophyll gets absorbed, so these colors start being reflected. So this whole idea of chlorophyll is actually what causes the changing of the leaves colors every fall. So the chlorophyll is absorbing energy from sunlight, and that energy is in the form of electrons. So an electron carrier is a compound that accepts the high energy electrons and transfers them to another molecule within the cell, within the plant. So chlorophyll contains the high energy electrons, and those are in the form of NADP. And you will not need to know that big long name. You just need to know NADP. So essentially NADP grabs a hold of two high energy electrons from the sunlight and also grabs a hold of a hydrogen ion, turning it into NADPH. So if you are following along on your book, there's an excellent analogy of this on page 232 that has to do with an oven mitt. So if you think about an oven mitt and what it's for grabbing something very hot. Okay? So this right here would contain the electrons. Electrons are high energy. They're hot. And you need the oven mitt to hold on to those high energy electrons. And that's your NADP. Because you've got to have an oven mitt to hold on to those high energy electrons. So the NADP is going to grab a hold of those electrons and also grab a hold of that hydrogen ion. Okay. And so then it will carry those NADPH. So you've got your NADPH, and it's going to take them from the oven and set them down somewhere else so that it can be eaten. And that's kind of exactly what you have going on in the cell. The NADP grabs a hold of those high energy electrons from the sun, plus a hydrogen ion, and transports them so a variety of other molecules can be built, so that these energy and this hydrogen can be taken elsewhere in the cell to make glucose, which is the plant's food. And this is a process we don't have to go through as heterotrophs because we make our own food. And you would see all of this taking place inside the chloroplast. All of this is going to be going on inside the chloroplast as the chlorophyll collects sunlight. So you've got carbon dioxide and water that's taken in by the plant. Plants take in carbon dioxide. We water plants. They receive light, and they manufacture sugar and give off oxygen. So this is what you've got going on inside a plant. These are the reactants over here. So you have the reactants plus light energy. Light energy is also reactants, very important. None of this could happen without the energy from the sun, those high energy electrons from the sun. And then these are your reactants over here, or your products, sugars and oxygen. So reactants, carbon dioxide, plus water, plus light energy, yield sugar and oxygen. And it is in a nice formula like this. So you've got the carbon dioxide plus the water, and that's 6 CO2 plus 6 H2O and light, and that will yield sugar, C6H12O6, plus oxygen, 6O2. So this is a very easy formula if you sit down and think about a plant. Plants take in carbon dioxide, and you have to water a plant, and it needs light. So if you think about the 3 essential key things for a plant, they have to be able to take in carbon dioxide, you have to water them, and they need light. And they're doing all this to make food for them so they can grow. Food is in the form of glucose, sugar, and plants give off oxygen. And you then have your complete formula for photosynthesis.